There's a revolution happening in living rooms, gardens, and quiet corners across the world, and society isn't ready to talk about it. Senior women, the very women who were told their entire worth depended on being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's caretaker, are walking away. They're choosing themselves, and the world that built its foundations on their sacrifice is shaking. This isn't about loneliness. This isn't about settling. This is about the most powerful choice a woman over 60 can make in a society that never wanted her to have choices at all. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about aging, independence, and what it means to live a revolutionary life. Welcome to the Heart Code, where we celebrate the strength, wisdom, and radical independence of women who refuse to shrink themselves for anyone's comfort. If you're a woman over 60 who has chosen yourself, or if you're questioning whether that choice is even allowed, this video is for you. And if you're someone who loves a senior woman and can't understand why she's happy alone, stay with me. What you're about to learn might change your perspective forever. Before we dive deep into this revolution, I need you to do something. If this message resonates with you, if you believe that senior women deserve to celebrate their independence without judgment, hit that like button right now. Leave a comment sharing your story or your thoughts, because your voice matters in this conversation. Share this video with every woman who needs to hear that choosing herself isn't selfish, it's sacred. Subscribe to the Heart Code and turn on notifications so you never miss content that honors your journey. And if you want to directly support this channel and help us reach more women with this empowering message, consider leaving a super thanks. Your support allows us to keep creating content that challenges the status quo and celebrates your autonomy. Now, let's talk about the revolution that society tried to hide. The invisible revolution. There's a demographic shift happening that demographers notice but society refuses to acknowledge. More women over 60 are living alone than at any other point in human history. And here's what makes this truly revolutionary. They're choosing it, not settling for it, not resigned to it, actively, consciously, deliberately choosing it. For decades, we've been fed a narrative. The narrative says that a woman alone is a woman incomplete, that a senior woman without a partner is someone to be pitied, someone who failed at the one job society assigned her, keeping a man. The narrative insists that women who age alone must be lonely, must be desperate, must be counting down the days until they find someone, anyone, to validate their existence. But here's what the narrative didn't account for. These women got wise. They lived long enough to see through the fairy tale. They invested decades in relationships that required them to shrink, to accommodate, to apologize for taking up space. They spent years making themselves smaller so someone else could feel bigger. And then something extraordinary happened. They decided they were done. Not with love, not with connection, not with joy. They were done with relationships that cost them their freedom, done with partnerships that demanded their silence, done with arrangements that treated their dreams as optional and their service as mandatory. This is the part that society can't process. These women aren't alone because no one wants them. They're alone because they finally want themselves more than they want approval. They're alone because they discovered that their own company is better than bad company, better than mediocre company, better than company that makes them feel like a guest in their own life. The lies we were told. Let's be brutally honest about what senior women were taught. You were raised in an era that had very specific expectations for your life. You were supposed to find a husband, make him happy, raise children, keep a home. And somewhere in that list of obligations, you were supposed to disappear, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually, creatively. You were supposed to become so focused on everyone else's needs that you forgot you had needs of your own. You were trained to believe that self-sacrifice wasn't just noble, it was your nature. That wanting time alone was selfish. That prioritizing your own peace was somehow a betrayal of your purpose. And many of you believed it. Because what choice did you have? The women who pushed back were called difficult, unnatural, cold. The women who asked for space were told they were failing at being women. The ones who dared to say they needed something different were reminded constantly that their role was to serve, not to want. So you served, you showed up, you smiled through exhaustion. You put your dreams on hold and then on hold again, and then so far back that you almost forgot you had them. You became experts at reading the room, managing moods, keeping peace. You learned to make yourself small enough to fit into spaces that were never designed for your full self. And then something happened. Maybe your children grew up. Maybe your partner passed away or you divorced. Maybe you just woke up one morning and realized you'd been holding your breath for 40 years. Whatever the catalyst, you arrived at a threshold. On one side was everything familiar. The role, the routine, the comfortable cage of other people's expectations. On the other side was something terrifying and thrilling, the possibility of choosing yourself. And you stepped through. What choosing yourself actually means. Here's where we need to get specific, because society loves to mischaracterize what this choice actually looks like. Choosing yourself doesn't mean becoming a hermit. It doesn't mean rejecting all relationships or deciding that people are worthless. It doesn't mean you're bitter or broken or incapable of love. Choosing yourself means this. You have decided that your peace is non-negotiable. Your time is precious, your energy is finite, and you will no longer invest these resources in situations that diminish you. It means you wake up in the morning and answer only to yourself. You don't have to negotiate your breakfast. You don't have to manage someone else's mood before you've had your coffee. You don't have to explain why you want to spend Saturday reading instead of entertaining. You don't owe anyone a justification for how you spend your hours. It means your home is yours. Every picture on the wall reflects your taste. Every piece of furniture serves your comfort. The thermostat is set to your preference. The television plays what you want to watch. The kitchen contains the foods you actually like. You can rearrange the living room at midnight because you felt like it, and you don't have to ask permission or brace for criticism. It means your friendships are chosen, not obligated. You spend time with people who energize you, not people who drain you. You can say no to invitations without guilt. You can say yes to adventures without clearing it with anyone. Your social calendar reflects your genuine desires, not your fear of disappointing others. It means your money is yours to manage. You're not explaining purchases. You're not justifying spending on yourself. You're not asking if you can afford to take that class or buy that book or plan that trip. You earned it. You saved it. You decide. It means your body belongs to you. You dress for your comfort. You eat when you're hungry. You rest when you're tired. You're not performing attractiveness for anyone's benefit. You're not managing someone else's expectations about how you should look or what you should weigh or whether you're aging gracefully enough. Most importantly, it means your future is open. You're not locked into someone else's vision of retirement. You can move if you want, travel if you want, change careers if you want, adopt a dog, take up painting, learn a language, start a business, or do absolutely nothing except sit in your garden and watch the birds. Whatever brings you joy is what you do, and you don't need anyone's blessing. This is what choosing yourself looks like, and this is what society finds so threatening. Why your independence terrifies society. Let's talk about why your choice to live alone and like it makes people so uncomfortable. Because it does. You've felt it in the concerned looks from your adult children, the pitying comments from acquaintances, the intrusive questions about whether you're lonely, the unsolicited advice about dating apps and senior centers and finding someone so you're not alone. This discomfort isn't about you. It's about what you represent. You represent the possibility that everything society taught about women's purpose was wrong. If you can be happy alone, if you can thrive without a partner, if you can create a meaningful life based on your own choices, then what was the point of all those rules? What was the point of teaching women that their value came from their relationships? What was the point of insisting that a woman without a man was a woman who failed? Your contentment alone is evidence that the old script was a lie, and people who built their lives around that script don't want evidence that they had another option. You also represent a choice that other women might start to want. When you live joyfully alone, when you radiate peace in your independence, when you demonstrate that a woman doesn't need to compromise herself to avoid loneliness, you give other women permission to question their own situations. You become a living example that the choice exists, and that terrifies people who benefit from women believing they have no choice. There's also this: your independence means you can't be controlled. You're not dependent on a partner for financial security. You're not reliant on family for emotional support. You're not desperate for companionship. This makes you dangerous in a society that maintains order by ensuring women always need something from someone. When you need nothing, you're ungovernable. You can speak truth, you can set boundaries, you can walk away from situations that don't serve you. And you will. Finally, your choice challenges the narrative about aging. Society wants older women to be grateful for attention, to accept whatever crumbs of companionship come their way, to view themselves as fortunate if anyone wants them at all. But you're not playing that game. You're not waiting to be chosen. You're not auditioning for the role of acceptable older woman. You chose yourself, which means you already won. This is revolutionary, and revolutions always make people uncomfortable. The practical power of living alone. Beyond the philosophical liberation, there's real, tangible power in living alone after 60. Let's talk about the practical ways this choice transforms daily existence. First, there's the power of time. When you live alone, your time belongs entirely to you. You're not coordinating schedules. You're not waiting for someone else to be ready. You're not adjusting your rhythm to match someone else's pace. If you're a morning person, you can embrace the sunrise without tiptoeing around someone who sleeps late. If you're a night owl, you can stay up reading or creating without worrying about disturbing anyone. This might seem small, but it's profound. Time is the one resource you can never get back. Every hour you spend managing someone else's preferences is an hour you're not spending on your own interests. When you live alone, you reclaim those hours. You can pursue hobbies that fascinate you without having to justify why you're spending time on them. You can develop skills that matter to you without someone questioning their usefulness. You can waste time in ways that bring you joy without defending your choices. Second, there's the power of space. Your home becomes entirely your sanctuary. You can design it to support your best life, not to accommodate someone else's habits. If you love bright colors, you paint the walls bright colors. If you want a room dedicated to your art or your writing or your yoga practice, you create that room. If you want to fill your shelves with books someone else might call clutter, you fill those shelves. This spatial autonomy affects your mental health more than you might realize. Living in a space that reflects your authentic self, rather than a compromise between your needs and someone else's, allows you to relax at a cellular level. You're not performing. You're not managing anyone's reaction to your choices. You're simply existing in a space that was built for you, by you. Third, there's the power of peace. When you live alone, your emotional environment is stable. You're not navigating someone else's moods. You're not wondering if today's going to be a good day or a difficult one based on factors outside your control. You're not walking on eggshells. You're not managing conflict. You're not soothing hurt feelings or defending yourself against criticism. This piece is transformative. Many women who live alone report feeling a level of calm they haven't experienced since childhood. They wake up without tension in their shoulders. They go to sleep without replaying arguments. They spend their days without that low-level anxiety that comes from sharing space with someone whose needs might conflict with yours at any moment. Fourth, there's the power of growth. Living alone gives you the space to become who you're meant to be without constant feedback or judgment. You can try new things without an audience. You can fail without someone reminding you they told you so. You can change your mind, change your style, change your entire approach to life without having to bring anyone along on the journey or convince them that your evolution is valid. This freedom to grow is especially important after 60. You've spent decades being who others needed you to be. Living alone gives you the chance to discover who you are when no one's watching, who you become when you're accountable only to yourself. Fifth, there's the power of choice in relationships. When you live alone, every interaction is voluntary. You spend time with people because you want to, not because you have to. Your relationships improve because they're based on genuine desire for connection, not obligation or fear of loneliness. You can love people more freely when you're not dependent on them for your sense of self or your daily happiness. This transforms the quality of your relationships. Your children notice that conversations feel different when you're engaging from a place of wholeness rather than need. Your friends appreciate that you're present because you choose to be, not because you're filling time. Even casual acquaintances respond differently to someone who is complete in themselves rather than searching for completion through others. The creative renaissance. Here's something beautiful that happens when senior women choose themselves. They start creating again, or for the first time. They pick up paintbrushes, they write poetry, they learn instruments, they start gardens, they take photographs, they design clothes, they build furniture, they cook elaborate meals for the pure joy of it. They create. This isn't a coincidence. Creation requires space. It requires time. It requires the mental freedom to explore without judgment. When your days were consumed with caring for others, when your energy went to managing a household and a relationship and everyone's needs, there was nothing left for creation. But when you live alone, when your time and space and energy belong to you, creation becomes possible. Some women discover talents they never knew they had. Others resurrect dreams they abandoned decades ago. The common thread is this: they're using their freedom to make things that didn't exist before. This is part of why choosing yourself is revolutionary. Society told you that your productive years were behind you, that after 60 you were supposed to slow down, step back, make room for younger people. But you're doing the opposite. You're experiencing a creative renaissance. You're proving that women over 60 aren't in decline. They're in bloom. The art you create, the gardens you tend, the words you write, the songs you learn, all of it is evidence that you weren't meant to shrink. You were meant to expand, and living alone gave you the room to do it. The financial truth. Let's address something practical that people often use to question women's choice to live alone: money. There's a persistent myth that women live alone because they can't afford to, or that living alone is financially irresponsible, or that senior women should find partners partially for economic security. This narrative is insulting and inaccurate. First, many women over 60 have their own financial resources. They worked, they saved, they planned. They're perfectly capable of supporting themselves. The assumption that they need a partner's income reveals more about society's outdated beliefs than about these women's actual financial situations. Second, living alone can actually be more affordable than people assume. You're not supporting someone else's spending habits. You're not compromising on purchases. You're not navigating financial disagreements. Your budget reflects your actual needs and values, not a negotiated compromise. Third, and this is crucial, financial security is never worth sacrificing your autonomy. Even if sharing expenses with a partner would make life easier financially, that's not a good enough reason to give up your freedom. You're not a business arrangement. Your life isn't a budget spreadsheet, and you're worth more than the cost savings of splitting rent. Many senior women report that living alone taught them financial skills they never developed before. They learned to manage investments. They discovered they could handle home repairs. They figured out budgeting in ways that served their actual lifestyle. They became financially literate and financially confident, often for the first time. This financial independence is part of the revolution. You're not waiting for someone to rescue you or provide for you. You're providing for yourself. And in doing so, you're proving that women don't need financial dependence to survive. They never did. The health dimension. There's an interesting phenomenon happening in the health outcomes of women who live alone versus women in unfulfilling relationships. Research is starting to show what many women already know intuitively. Bad company is worse for your health than no company. Women in stressful relationships show higher levels of cortisol, the stress hormone linked to numerous health problems. They report more physical symptoms, more insomnia, more anxiety. Their immune systems are compromised by constant conflict or emotional labor. Meanwhile, women who live alone and have chosen that life report lower stress levels. They sleep better. They have more regular health habits because they're not accommodating someone else's schedule or preferences. They exercise when they want to exercise. They eat foods that make them feel good. They go to bed when they're tired and wake up when they're rested. This isn't to say that all relationships are unhealthy or that all solo living is healthy, but it is to say that the relationship between companionship and health is more complex than society admits. Being alone doesn't automatically make you unhealthy, and being partnered doesn't automatically make you healthy. What matters is whether your living situation supports your well-being. For many women over 60, living alone does exactly that. It removes sources of chronic stress. It gives them control over their environment and their habits. It allows them to prioritize their health without negotiating or compromising. The women thriving alone aren't lonely, they're liberated, and their health reflects that liberation. Addressing the loneliness question. We need to talk directly about the concern people most often raise. Aren't you lonely? This question reveals a fundamental misunderstanding. It assumes that alone equals lonely. It assumes that without a romantic partner, a woman must be suffering. It assumes that human connection can only happen within specific sanctioned relationships. All of these assumptions are wrong. Loneliness isn't about being alone. Loneliness is about disconnection. It's entirely possible to be lonely in a marriage, lonely in a crowded room, lonely while surrounded by family. Loneliness happens when you can't be your authentic self, when you're not truly seen, when you're going through the motions of connection without experiencing actual intimacy. Many women report feeling lonelier in their marriages than they ever felt living alone, because in their marriages, they were with someone but not known by them. They were sharing space but not sharing selves. They were talking but not being heard. When you live alone by choice, you're not disconnecting from people. You're choosing the terms of your connections. You maintain friendships that energize you. You participate in communities that interest you. You engage with family members you genuinely enjoy. You create connections based on mutual respect and shared interests, not obligation or desperation. The quality of these chosen connections is different from the quality of connections based on need. When you're whole in yourself, when you're not looking to other people to complete you or validate you or fill your days, you show up to relationships as your full self. This allows for deeper, more authentic connection than many people experience in traditional relationships. So no, women who choose to live alone are not lonelier. They're often more connected, more engaged, more present in their relationships, because those relationships are chosen rather than required. The sexuality conversation. There's an elephant in the room that we need to address: sexuality. Society has very uncomfortable feelings about senior women and sexuality. There's a persistent myth that older women aren't sexual or shouldn't be sexual, or that their value in relationships is no longer tied to physical intimacy. These myths serve to control women. They suggest that once you're past a certain age, you should be grateful for any attention and certainly shouldn't have preferences or standards about physical intimacy. But here's the truth that makes people uncomfortable. Women who choose to live alone aren't choosing celibacy unless they want to. They're choosing autonomy about when, how, and with whom they experience intimacy. Some women discover that living alone allows them to explore their sexuality in ways they never could in long-term relationships. Without the pressure of maintaining desire in a decades-long partnership, without the baggage of old conflicts affecting physical intimacy, they're free to approach sexuality on their own terms. Other women realize they're perfectly content without sexual relationships, not because they're too old or undesirable, but because sex simply isn't a priority, and that's equally valid. The revolutionary part is this: these women are making choices about their own bodies and their own intimate lives without needing anyone's permission. They're not settling for unfulfilling physical relationships because they're afraid of being alone. They're not performing desire they don't feel. They're not compromising their comfort or their boundaries. They're claiming sovereignty over their own sexuality. And in a culture that spent centuries telling women that their bodies existed for others' pleasure, this sovereignty is radical. The adult children's perspective. If you're an adult child of a senior woman who has chosen to live alone, you might be struggling with this choice. You might worry. You might not understand. You might feel like you should do something to fix her situation. Let's talk about what your mother doesn't want you to know but needs you to hear. Your concern comes from love, but it might be based on outdated assumptions. You grew up in a world that told you women need partners. You absorbed the message that older women alone are sad, vulnerable, incomplete. So when your mother chooses to live alone, your first instinct is to worry that something's wrong. But consider this. Your mother has more life experience than you do. She's navigated relationships longer than you've been alive. She's tried things you're just starting to try. And she's arrived at a conclusion based on decades of data about what actually makes her happy. When she says she's content, alone, believe her. Don't project your fears onto her experience. Don't assume that what would make you lonely must make her lonely too. Don't treat her joy as denial or her peace as resignation. Your mother choosing herself doesn't mean she doesn't love you. It doesn't mean she's given up on life. It doesn't mean she's bitter about her past. It means she's decided that at this stage of her life, she wants the freedom to be entirely herself. And she's discovered that this freedom brings more satisfaction than any relationship she'd have to compromise herself to maintain. The best way to support your mother isn't to fix her situation. It's to honor her choice. Stop suggesting dating apps. Stop inviting her to move in with you out of pity. Stop treating her independence as a problem that needs solving. Instead, celebrate her courage. Recognize that she's doing something many women never dare to do. She's putting herself first. After decades of putting everyone else first, she's finally living for herself. That's not sad. That's inspiring. The friendship revolution. Something extraordinary happens in women's friendships when they choose to live alone. The friendships deepen. They become central. They become life-giving in ways that weren't possible when romantic partnerships took priority. Women who live alone often report that their friendships are the richest, most satisfying relationships in their lives. These aren't surface friendships. These are deep, lasting connections based on genuine understanding, shared values, and mutual support. Part of this is practical. When you live alone, you have the time and energy to invest in friendships. You're not saving all your emotional energy for a partner. You're not relegating friends to secondary importance. They become primary. But there's something deeper happening too. Women who have chosen themselves understand other women who have chosen themselves. There's a recognition, a mutual respect and appreciation for each other's courage. These friendships are built on equality and autonomy rather than need and dependence. These women travel together. They create together. They celebrate together. They support each other through challenges. They speak truth to each other without fear of damaging the relationship, because the relationship is built on honesty, not pretense. This is yet another way that choosing to live alone is revolutionary. It redefines which relationships matter most. It elevates friendships between women to the status they always deserved. It proves that women don't need romantic partnerships to experience profound connection and intimacy. The spiritual dimension. There's a spiritual component to choosing yourself that doesn't get discussed enough. Living alone creates space for spiritual practice, for meditation, for contemplation, for the kind of deep inner work that requires solitude and silence. Many women report that living alone allowed them to develop a spiritual life they never had time for before. They meditate daily. They pray without interruption. They read spiritual texts. They sit in silence. They connect with something larger than themselves in ways that feel authentic rather than performative. This spiritual development isn't about religion, though it can include religion. It's about developing a relationship with yourself, with the universe, with the mystery of existence. It's about finding meaning and purpose that comes from within, rather than from your role in someone else's life. When you spend years being defined by your relationships, your identity becomes external. You're someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's friend. But who are you when you're alone? Who are you when no one's watching? What do you believe when you don't have to defend those beliefs to anyone? Living alone gives you the space to answer these questions, to discover what you actually believe rather than what you were taught to believe, to develop practices that genuinely feed your soul rather than practices you maintain because they're expected. This spiritual autonomy is deeply threatening to systems that rely on women being spiritually dependent. Whether it's religious institutions that tell women their value comes from submission, or secular institutions that tell women their worth comes from productivity, all of them want women to look outward for validation. But when you live alone, when you develop a rich inner life, you stop needing external validation. You find your worth in your own existence. You discover that you're enough, exactly as you are. And this discovery is perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of choosing yourself. The legacy you're creating. Think about what you're modeling for younger generations. Your granddaughters, your nieces, the young women who know you, they're watching, they're learning from your choice. You're teaching them that women have options, that marriage isn't mandatory, that being alone can be a choice rather than a circumstance, that a woman's worth isn't determined by her relationship status, that happiness doesn't require a partner. This is a gift, because the younger women growing up now are still getting mixed messages. On one hand, they're told they can be anything. On the other hand, They're still shown endless media depicting women as incomplete without romantic love. They're still pressured to find partners, settle down, couple up. Your life offers them a different narrative. You're living proof that a woman can thrive alone, that choosing yourself isn't selfish, that prioritizing your own peace and autonomy leads to a rich, meaningful, joyful life. You're breaking generational patterns. Your mother might have stayed in an unfulfilling marriage because she thought she had no choice, but you're showing your daughter and granddaughter that they do have choices, that they're allowed to choose themselves, that they're allowed to prioritize their own well-being over societal expectations. This is revolutionary work. You might not think of yourself as an activist. You're just living your life the way that makes sense to you. But your life is activism. Every day you wake up content in your solitude. You're challenging centuries of conditioning. Every time you decline a date because you prefer your own company, you're defying expectations. Every moment you demonstrate that a woman alone can be happy, you're revolution. The young women watching you will remember, when they face their own crossroads, when they're deciding whether to stay in a relationship that's dimming their light or to choose themselves, they'll think of you. They'll remember that you did it, and that will give them courage. The joy factor. Let's talk about something that often gets overlooked in discussions about women living alone. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated, abundant joy. When you live alone by choice, joy becomes accessible in ways it wasn't before. You don't have to justify your joy. You don't have to tone it down so someone else doesn't feel threatened. You don't have to share the things that bring you joy with someone who doesn't understand or appreciate them. You can dance in your kitchen at midnight. You can sing off-key in the shower. You can spend an entire Saturday doing something that someone else would call pointless, but that fills you with delight. You can laugh at things no one else finds funny. You can cry at things that move you without explaining why they matter. This freedom to feel your feelings fully, to express your joy without self-consciousness, to pursue pleasure without permission, it transforms daily life. The small moments become significant. The ordinary becomes extraordinary. Women who live alone often report feeling more alive than they've felt in decades. Colors seem brighter. Music sounds better. Food tastes more delicious. Not because anything external has changed, but because they're finally present enough to notice they're not performing life. They're living it. This joy is contagious. When you're genuinely happy, people feel it. They're drawn to it. They want to understand it. And in trying to understand your joy, they start to question their own choices. They start to wonder if maybe they could be happier too. If maybe choosing yourself isn't as scary as it seems. If maybe joy is possible outside the narrow parameters society set for women. Your joy is revolutionary. It's evidence that the old rules were wrong. It's proof that women can flourish outside traditional structures. It's inspiration for every woman who has been taught to sacrifice her happiness for everyone else's comfort. The freedom to change your mind. Here's something important that needs to be said. Choosing to live alone doesn't mean you can never change your mind. This isn't a life sentence, it's a life choice, and choices can evolve. Some women live alone for a season and then find a partner who enhances rather than diminishes their life. Some women alternate between periods of solitude and periods of partnership. Some women stay contentedly alone for the rest of their lives. All of these paths are valid. The revolutionary part isn't the permanence of the choice. It's the fact that you're making the choice at all. For too long, women's relationship status was something that happened to them rather than something they chose. They fell in love. They were proposed to. They were expected to say yes. And once they said yes, they were expected to stay, regardless of how the relationship evolved. But when you choose to live alone, You're reclaiming agency over your relationship status. You're saying that being alone is an active choice, not a passive state. And if you later decide you want a partnership, that will also be an active choice. You won't be settling. You won't be compromising out of fear or loneliness. You'll be choosing a specific person who adds value to an already complete life. This is what freedom looks like. Not the absence of relationships, but the presence of choice. The ability to say yes or no based on what serves your authentic self, rather than on what society expects or what fear dictates. The political is personal. We need to acknowledge something. Your choice to live alone is political. Even if you don't think of it that way, even if you just want to live your life in peace without making a statement, the personal is political. How you structure your private life reflects and reinforces larger social patterns. For centuries, women's lives have been structured around service to others. This wasn't accidental, it was essential to maintaining a particular social order. When you opt out of that structure, you're disrupting that order. You're demonstrating that women don't need to organize their entire existence around caring for others, that a woman's life can be meaningful without martyrdom. That self-interest isn't the same as selfishness. This makes your choice inherently political. You're living evidence that the old system wasn't natural or inevitable. It was constructed, and what was constructed can be deconstructed. Some women embrace this political dimension. They talk openly about their choice. They encourage other women to consider it. They write about it, speak about it, create communities around it. Other women just want to live quietly without turning their life into a cause. And that's equally valid. But whether you embrace it or not, your life is political. Every day you live contentedly alone, you're making a statement about what women are entitled to. Every time you prioritize your own needs, you're challenging the expectation that women exist to meet others' needs. Every moment you demonstrate that a woman can be complete in herself, you're threatening the systems that require women to be incomplete. You don't have to become an activist, but you should understand that in simply living your truth, you're participating in a larger movement toward women's autonomy and self-determination. The comparison trap. One challenge women face when choosing to live alone is the comparison trap. You're living one life, and everyone around you seems to be living differently. Your friends are coupled. Your siblings are in relationships. Social media shows you endless images of romantic partnership presented as the ultimate goal. It's easy to start questioning your choice when you're constantly confronted with alternative paths. It's easy to wonder if you're missing something, if you should try harder, if you're making a mistake. This is where you need to remember something crucial. You're comparing your real life to other people's curated presentations. You're seeing their highlight reels and comparing them to your behind-the-scenes footage. The couples you envy might be hiding profound unhappiness. The relationships that look perfect might be exhausting performances. The partnerships that seem enviable might involve compromises you'd never be willing to make. You don't know what happens behind closed doors. You don't know what it costs those people to maintain their relationships. You don't know what they've sacrificed, what they've settled for, what they've given up. What you do know is how you feel in your own life. You know whether you wake up with a sense of peace or dread. You know whether your days feel expansive or constrictive. You know whether you're growing or shrinking. You know whether you're honoring yourself or abandoning yourself. Trust that knowledge. Trust your own experience. Stop comparing your choice to other people's choices and start evaluating it based on whether it serves your actual life. The comparison trap is just another way society tries to make you doubt yourself. Don't fall for it. Your life doesn't need to look like anyone else's life to be valuable, meaningful, and joyful. The courage it takes. Let's acknowledge something that often goes unsaid. Choosing to live alone after 60 takes enormous courage. It's not the path of least resistance. It's not what you were raised to do. It's not what society expects or approves of. Every day you make this choice, you're swimming against a powerful current of social conditioning. You're defying expectations that were embedded in your psyche before you had language to question them. You're facing judgment from people who think they know what's best for you. This requires courage. The courage to trust yourself over the voices telling you you're wrong. The courage to define success on your own terms rather than accepting handed-down definitions. The courage to be different in a world that punishes difference, especially in women. The courage to disappoint people who expected you to stay small. The courage to prioritize your needs, even when it makes others uncomfortable. The courage to value your peace over other people's approval. Some days this courage feels easy. You're so clear about your choice, so content in your life, that external opinions barely register. Other days, it's harder. You second-guess yourself. You wonder if you should try to be different, do something different, want something different. On those hard days, remember this. Courage isn't the absence of doubt. It's the decision to honor your truth even when doubt is present. It's choosing yourself even when it would be easier to choose what others want for you. You are brave. Every single day you live authentically, you are brave. Don't let anyone, including yourself, diminish that. The transformation process. Choosing to live alone isn't usually a light switch moment. It's a process, a transformation that happens over time, often in stages. Maybe you started by just wanting some space, some time to yourself, a break from the demands of relationship. You thought it would be temporary. Then you started noticing things, how much lighter you felt, how much more energy you had, how your interests started emerging again after years of dormancy, how you could hear yourself think. And slowly, what started as a break became a choice. What felt temporary revealed itself as something you actually wanted. The peace you found wasn't something you wanted to give up. The freedom wasn't something you wanted to trade. This transformation can feel confusing. If you didn't hate your previous relationship, if you weren't fleeing abuse or profound unhappiness, it can be hard to explain why you prefer being alone. People expect clear villains and obvious problems. They don't understand that you can leave something that was okay in pursuit of something that's better. But better is exactly what you found. Not perfect, not problem-free, but better aligned with who you actually are and what you actually need at this stage of your life. This transformation continues even after you've made the choice. You keep discovering new aspects of yourself. You keep shedding old beliefs about who you're supposed to be. You keep expanding into the space you've created. This is lifelong work. Becoming yourself fully never ends. But choosing to live alone gives you the ideal conditions for that work. Every day is an opportunity to know yourself better, to honor yourself more deeply, to live more authentically. The unexpected gifts. Women who choose to live alone often discover gifts they never anticipated, benefits that weren't part of the plan but emerged from the choice. Some discover talents they didn't know they had. Without someone else taking care of certain tasks, they learned to do things themselves. They figured out home repairs. They managed technology. They handled finances. They navigated systems. And in doing so, they discovered competence and capability that had always been there but never had room to develop. Others discovered depths of creativity they'd lost touch with. The mental space that opens up when you're not managing a relationship allows for creative exploration. Ideas that were buried under years of obligation start to surface. Projects that were always postponed become possible. Many discover a level of self-sufficiency that's deeply satisfying. Not just practical self-sufficiency, but emotional self-sufficiency. the ability to comfort yourself, to solve your own problems, to provide for your own needs, to be your own best friend. Some discover unexpected communities. When you're not defaulting to a partner for all social interaction, you branch out. You find groups of people who share your interests. You develop friendships that might never have formed if you'd been primarily focused on a romantic relationship. Others discover the gift of solitude itself, the richness of being alone, the depth of self-knowledge that comes from spending time with yourself, the peace of not having to be on all the time, the restoration that happens in silence and stillness. These gifts aren't guaranteed. Living alone doesn't automatically bestow them, but choosing to live alone creates the conditions where they can emerge, and once they do, they transform your understanding of what's possible in a life. The redefinition of success society has very specific ideas about what a successful life looks like for a woman. Those ideas usually involve partnership, family, grandchildren, and a support system built around traditional relationships. When you choose to live alone, you're rejecting that definition of success. You're saying that success looks different for you, and this requires you to get very clear about what you actually value. For some women, success becomes about creative output. They measure their life by what they make, what they contribute, what they leave behind. Their worth isn't tied to their relationships, but to their creations. For others, success is about experiences, adventures, travel, learning, growth. They accumulate memories and skills rather than relationships and responsibilities. For others still, success is simply about peace, about waking up each day without dread, about going to sleep each night without regret, about living in alignment with their values and their authentic self. The beautiful thing about redefining success is that you get to choose the metrics. You're not being graded by someone else's rubric. You're not competing with anyone. You're not trying to prove anything. You're simply asking yourself, does my life feel good to me? Am I becoming who I want to become? Am I spending my time in ways that feel meaningful? Am I honoring my values? Am I growing? When the answers are yes, you're successful, regardless of what anyone else thinks, regardless of whether your life looks like the life you were supposed to want. This redefinition of success is part of what makes choosing yourself revolutionary. You're not just changing how you live, you're changing how you measure a life worth living. The community of revolutionaries. You're not alone in this choice, even though you're living alone. All over the world, women are making the same decision. They're choosing themselves. They're prioritizing their autonomy. They're discovering that they can thrive outside traditional relationship structures. This is a community, even if it's not formally organized. When you meet another woman who's made this choice, there's recognition, an understanding that doesn't need explanation, a mutual respect for the courage it takes. This community exists online in forums and social media groups. It exists in local communities where women gather for activities and adventures. It exists in the knowing glances exchanged between women at social events who came alone and are glad they did. Being part of this community, even informally, matters. It reminds you that you're not strange or broken or wrong. It reinforces that your choice is valid. It provides models of different ways to live this life, different approaches to navigating the challenges, different expressions of the same basic commitment to self. This community is also growing. More and more women are making this choice. The revolution is expanding, and as it expands, it becomes easier for each individual woman to make the choice because she can see that others have done it and thrived. You're part of a movement, whether you think of yourself that way or not. A movement toward women's full autonomy and self-determination. A movement that says women's lives can be rich and meaningful regardless of their relationship status. a movement that refuses to accept the old rules about what women are supposed to want and need and be. This movement doesn't have a leader or a manifesto. It's organic, it's emergent. It's happening because individual women, one at a time, are making the brave choice to prioritize themselves. And every time one more woman makes that choice, the movement gets stronger, the path gets clearer, the revolution grows. The wisdom of age. There's something specific about making this choice after 60 that matters. You're not making it from inexperience or naivety. You're making it from wisdom. You've lived long enough to know what relationships require. You've had decades to observe marriages, partnerships, various forms of coupling. You've seen what works and what doesn't. You've seen what people sacrifice to stay coupled. You've seen what people gain and what they lose. You've also had time to know yourself, to understand your patterns, your needs, your non-negotiables. You're not still figuring out who you are, you know. This wisdom makes your choice credible in a way that the same choice at 25 might not be. You're not avoiding relationships because you haven't figured out how to do them. You're choosing to be alone because you've figured out that relationships aren't worth what they cost you personally. This wisdom also protects you from second-guessing. When you're young and you choose to be alone, there's always the question, but what if? What if you meet someone amazing? What if you're closing yourself off to possibilities? At 60 plus, you know better. You know that amazing people exist, but that doesn't mean a relationship with them would enhance your life. You know that possibilities are infinite, but you're at peace with the possibility you've chosen. You know yourself too well to believe that a relationship, no matter how good, could give you anything better than what you have in your autonomy. This is the gift of age, the clarity, the certainty, the wisdom to know what you want and the courage to choose it regardless of what anyone else thinks. The legacy beyond you. Think about what happens when your life ends. What story will people tell about you? What will they remember? They'll remember that you lived on your own terms, that you chose yourself, that you demonstrated extraordinary courage, that you were happy in a way many people never achieve, because you had the wisdom to know what you actually needed and the strength to pursue it. They'll remember that you didn't settle, that you didn't compromise your peace, that you valued your autonomy more than social approval. They'll remember that you created a rich, full, meaningful life without following the script you were handed, that you rewrote the ending, that you proved a woman alone can flourish. This is the legacy that matters, not whether you were partnered, not whether you followed the rules, but whether you lived authentically, whether you honored yourself, whether you had the courage to choose your own path. The young women in your family will tell their daughters about you. They'll say, "She lived alone and she was happy. She didn't need anyone to complete her because she was already complete. She showed us that we get to choose." And those stories will ripple forward. They'll give permission to women who aren't born yet to make choices that honor their authentic selves. They'll contribute to a world where women's autonomy is assumed rather than questioned, where living alone is seen as a valid choice rather than a circumstance to be pitied. Your life is creating that world. Every day you live authentically, you're building a foundation for future women to stand on. You're proving that the old rules can be broken, that new possibilities exist, that women can define success on their own terms. This is revolutionary work, and it matters far beyond your individual life. The revolution happening in senior women's lives isn't loud. It doesn't march in streets or carry signs. It happens quietly in individual homes and individual hearts. But make no mistake, it is a revolution. Every woman who chooses herself is challenging centuries of conditioning that told her she had to shrink, serve, sacrifice. Every woman who prioritizes her own peace over society's expectations is breaking chains that constrained generations of women before her. Every woman who demonstrates that she can thrive alone is proving that the old rules were always lies. If you're a woman over 60 who has chosen yourself, you're not selfish, you're not bitter, you're not running from love, you're running toward yourself. You're claiming the life you were always entitled to but were told you couldn't have. You're living the truth that a woman alone is not a woman lacking, but a woman complete. If you're considering this choice but you're afraid, know this: the fear is real, but so is the freedom on the other side of it. The discomfort of going against expectations is temporary. The peace of living authentically is permanent. If you're an adult child or friend of a woman making this choice, your support means everything. Celebrate her courage. Honor her decision. Recognize that she's not asking you to understand, just to respect that she knows what she needs. To everyone watching this who believes in women's right to autonomy, to self-determination, to lives built on their own terms, share this message. Let other women know that choosing yourself is an option, that living alone can be a rich, joyful, meaningful choice. That revolution doesn't always look like what we expect, but it's happening anyway. This is the Heart Code, where we celebrate the strength of women who refuse to apologize for taking up space in their own lives. Before you go, if this message resonated with you, hit that like button. Your engagement helps us reach more women who need to hear this truth. Leave a comment telling us your story or sharing your thoughts. Your voice matters, and your experience adds to this growing movement. Share this video with every woman who needs permission to choose herself. Subscribe to the Heart Code and turn on notifications so you never miss content that honors your autonomy and celebrates your courage. And if you want to directly support this channel and help us continue creating content that challenges the status quo and empowers senior women, please consider leaving a super thanks. Your contribution allows us to keep bringing this revolutionary message to women who need it. You are not too old to choose yourself. You are not too late to prioritize your peace. You are not wrong to want a life built entirely on your own terms. You are revolutionary, and the world is better because you had the courage to prove that a woman alone is not a woman diminished, but a woman free. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for showing us all what's possible when a woman finally, fully, unapologetically chooses herself. This is the Heart Code, reminding you that your autonomy is sacred, your peace is non-negotiable, and your choice to live alone is nothing short of revolutionary.